I'd like you to consider what these 4 objects have in common. In fact, they're all famous failures, created by accident by their makers, all human beings meaning to create something entirely different. The Leaning Tower of Pisa was created on a foundation that was much softer on one side than the other, but now we know it is one of the most famous tourist attractions in Europe. Potato chips were created when an unhappy, very fussy customer was unsatisfied with his plate of fried potatoes and kept sending it back to the kitchen until the chef got so fed up that he fried them to a crisp. The customer loved them, actually. 2,000 years ago, a Chinese cook's kitchen experiment went horribly wrong, and the food he was creating turned into fireworks. And the humble post-it note was an accidental stationery creation, originally intended to be a much longer-term adhesive that didn't really have the staying power required of it. I'm sure that we don't consider any of these 4 objects to be failures, and that we're grateful for at least one of them in our lives. And here we have 3 human beings who have all failed in one way or another, sometimes more than once. J.K. Rowling's first Harry Potter novel was repeatedly rejected while she was a single mother living close to the poverty line. The Beatles were denied a contract by Decca, the leading company of the time, because their music was too rough and raw for the era. And Steve Jobs worked for Apple in the 80s before he got encouraged to leave because he didn't see eye to eye with the other engineers. If these 3 people would simply thrown in the towel, we wouldn't have the magic of Hogwarts, we wouldn't know who Sergeant Pepper was, and we wouldn't own those iPhones in our pockets. I'm here today to talk about how failure is actually an integral part of our lives and how we wouldn't be the people we are today without it. Let me elaborate on this by telling you a story of my own. I was pretty good at most things I did growing up. I was an A student at school. I was in the choirs, the school productions, drama club, you name it. I was generally a good role model for my fellow students. I did well at university, and after working for a few years, I traveled my way around the world alone. I wrote songs and I performed them to strangers in open mic nights without a second thought. I kind of got used to being good at things, which later became something a bit hard for me to give up. After traveling and returning to New Zealand, I went to Teachers College, and I found that I was pretty good at that too, at least in practice. I turned up on time. I did all my work in the evenings, and at the end of the year, I got employed at a well-respected liberal arts school. So it was 2008, my first year of teaching. My expectations were way high. I was going to go in and be the best teacher ever. I was there to change lives and inspire people. I'd moved cities for the job, and I went in all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, but a week later I was looking more like a squirrel in headlights. The idea really hit me of what I'd got myself into. The workload felt phenomenal. I was working 6 days a week on planning lessons that more often than not were falling apart. Often, a sea of blank stares was my only audience, and I found I had very little idea about how to control one particular group of students that were eating me alive. There were only 16 of them, but they felt like 40. They would turn up late with outlandish excuses, sit back, put their feet up on the desks, and just enjoy the spectacle of this new teacher nervously tripping over her tongue that didn't really have any idea of how to control them. Strange noises emanated from different corners of the room. They would synchronize their alarms to go off in their school bags. There was always a competition to see who could jump out of the window without me noticing. And one kid succeeded once when my back was turned. He became the hero for the rest of the year. Daily jokes were played, a lot of interesting graffiti showed up on my worksheets, and a lot of fun was had by everybody, except me. And they weren't malicious at all. They just saw me as easy entertainment. They just wanted to have fun. It was nothing too unusual. There were much worse things that could have happened, I know. But the point is, I had just been so used to being good at things that it came as a shock. I would dread having to walk in every day and be a teacher. I was just Sharon, and all of a sudden I had to assume a role. And the workload, did I mention the workload? I had so many great ideas for things that just fell flat. I would spend hours cutting out individual words for students to make into poems that just ended up as spitballs. I tried way too hard to please everybody while neglecting my own work-life balance, which is a trap I'm sure most of you can relate to. After my first term, I visited my old city and I talked to my friends about how I did feel essentially trapped. Most listened, but some said, maybe teaching's not for you. Maybe you should consider changing jobs. And after investing a lot of time and money in this, it didn't really feel like welcome advice. I felt like I'd failed because here I was, a year ago, traveling around the world with the world my oyster, and now just feeling like the shell was cracking. It's no secret that teaching's a tough job. A recent study completed last year by the US Department of Education found that 1 in 10 first-year teachers chose not to stick it out after their first year, a whole 10%. 17% of the same focus group were to leave in 5 years or less. And considering that the majority of teachers go in with big ideals and invest a lot of money in their education, this is a significant number. But I was determined not to be just a statistic. Teaching was in my family, and I knew that I had the potential to be good at it, but it just wasn't happening overnight. And it is tempting to give up, right? The long hours, the ridicule, the desk covered in paper, which hasn't changed, the worksheets crumpled on the floor. But as tempted as I was to throw in the towel, the desire to better myself won out. The best piece of advice I got that year was from our school's counselor. She had gathered all the frazzled first-year teachers together in the library about 2 months into the term, and she looked at us. She looked at our tired faces. She said, "Stop trying to change the world and just survive." And that really was the best piece of advice I got. It was so realistic. No one had told me this in Teachers College. And it seems wrong when you're surrounded by people doing amazing things in education, but everybody grows at a different pace. And it took me a while to learn this. It takes years to grow a teacher. But enough about teaching for a while. I'm interested in how we can come back from these so-called failures and fail with grace. I mean, it's hard to accept that we're not awesome 100% of the time, right? But first of all, I think we need to challenge our own ideas about what it means to be a success. Is our idea of success healthy or realistic, or does it entail burnout? And if it entails working day and night without a particular goal in sight, then it's probably not healthy. Do our ideas of achievement come from societal values that might not be our own? We're all fed images of what we should aspire to and what our lives should look like from internet and other media, that it's easy to understand how we can internalize these ideas of perfection. For me, it was all about Ms. G from Freedom Riders. I discovered I was not quite as cool and collected as Ms. G. Freedom Riders is a film about a teacher played by Hilary Swank who goes in and turns a school of troubled kids around overnight. They're all gangster dancing in the classroom and they're having a great time. And I played this to my students in my first year. They loved it, but when they left, I would just sit at my desk and think, why can't I be more like Ms. G? And this is based on a true story. The real Erin Gruelle was an amazing teacher, and we need these role models, absolutely. But it's important to remember that success looks different to each and every one of us, and it can be dangerous to live up to unrealistic expectations. We also need to stop basing our worth on other people's opinions of us. Most of us, we're our own harshest self-critics. It's good to keep in mind that nobody else is going to remember these failures like you will. The kid that jumped out of the window in my first year of teaching, I'm sure he saw that as a great success. Rather, it's how we learn to deal with these failures that makes us the people we are today. We cannot underestimate the power of community or mentorship. If we talk about our failures, we can not only help ourselves reflect on how differently we might do them next time, but we can also help others learn from our mistakes. The same study I referred to earlier found that teachers that had mentors had a much higher staying rate, and I was lucky that I did. Having someone that reminded me to take off the suit of armor at the end of the day, or the mask, and assume a work-life balance is invaluable. Next, we have empathy. The importance of being able to relate to other people's stories of success and failure both allows this to happen. After I'd started teaching, I became much more sympathetic to other equally stressed out human beings. Before, when I just had an easy job and I hadn't had to think too much or had been too challenged, I think I'd been much quicker to judge people that were not on my level of equilibrium. And if we always succeed at everything, we can get used to it and it can isolate us from the general struggle of being human. We're all struggling in one way or another, and a little kindness goes a long way. Last of all, as much as we can, I think we should enjoy the ride. Failure's good for us. Doesn't it help us improve? We get bored if it's too easy. And failing is how we ultimately improve rather than just plateau. We need something to push us to improve, and this talk is a perfect example for me. I ran through it for the first time 2 weeks ago and it was terrible, but I needed an early failure to spur me into action and produce something a little more coherent for you all. Now, music has always been a much more familiar language for me, so now I'm going to let a song speak for me. I used to write songs regularly, but I haven't written for more than a year, so I challenged myself to write a song for this talk. And it's pretty imperfect, and it's ridiculously simple, and I'll probably keep changing the lyrics, but I'm going to play it to you today, and it's Imperfection. And it doesn't have a name. It's just called Work in Progress. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, wonderful. Cool, okay. And I'm standing in this skin so raw. It felt much easier before to be clothed in a safe suit of success. But these days I'm not at my best. It's crunch time now, but it's quite crunchless. My mojo's failing me, and I'm impossibly adrift in this sea. What happened to the ones we were? Riding on the edges of the golden world with glasses of rose. We just got older, I suppose. I've cursed these feelings, yeah. And the dips, they make me feel things more. But there's nowhere that I'd be without a fall or two for humility. It's better in the end to know the feels in others' eyes than to stand back and just pretend. And I'll have more life to share with the stories that I tell from the races won and lost. So I'm toasting to the ones we were, all of the mistakes they made, and I'm raising up my glass to imperfection, that's a change. And I'm raising up my glass to imperfection, that's a change. finally drew to a close and my first year of teaching was done. My second year was considerably better than the first, and I stayed for a third, which was even better. But then I did take a year or two off. I travelled again, changed countries more than once, and eventually found my niche. 7 years in, some days I'm still just surviving, but ultimately I'm much more comfortable in my teacher skin. We all have what we consider to be failures or bad decisions. We can tend to run away too quickly from what seem like our mistakes. But sometimes if we just sit with things, no matter how uncomfortable they are, we can turn them into something. We can get a song or a painting out of them. We can use them to add to our repertoire of life stories and help us understand how difficult and how wonderful it is to be human. Thank you.